All right, welcome everybody to the November conference call. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Zach Smith. I work under Jim in the Research, Education, and Sales Department. Matt Gooding and Jim Halbeisen are also joining us on this call. So the structure and topics of this call, Jim is going to start out with the current events, as he normally does. And then we're going to dive into an experiment that was done a couple of years ago at this point. It's been done a couple more times since then, but it really highlights the uniqueness and quality of GMS, and that's the dried growers experiment for any of you that may be familiar with it. So I've got a little slideshow, and I mean emphasis on the little, that I'm going to be screen sharing once we get into that topic. So for those of you that have a laptop or are in on a laptop or a smartphone, you should be able to see that. For those that aren't, don't worry. It's some pictures that will help guys understand what we're talking about, but we're still going to go into detail just talking, so you won't be missing out. So with that said, if when question time comes and you want to speak, it's on a phone, it's *6 to unmute yourself. And if you're on a computer or a phone or a smartphone, there should be a little microphone icon in the bottom left of your screen. If it has a red line through it, it means you're muted. So just click that and they'll unmute you. You can also raise your hand, I believe, though I can't see how to do that at the moment. And then somebody else, one of the moderators can unmute you as well. So with that said, I think we'll get started with Jim and current events. So take her away, Jim, when you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready, Zach. As far as current events are concerned, the WASAID report came out on Tuesday, gentlemen, and the U.S. government surprised the Board of Trade by lowering the soybean yield. They held the corn yield basically the same. They upped it a little bit. The numbers on usage were up a little bit for both corn and beans. It appears that this soybean thing has been a little bit trickier for the government to make a shot at. And the damage that they are seeing in the upper north central region is more significant than they anticipated. Discussing this with our customers up in that area, guys had some very nice yields, but there were areas where they went through like a total drought cycle, and that had brought the yields down quite significantly. So if you look at the report itself, Minnesota, both Dakotas, their yields were down. One of the things that was a little surprising was in the east, particularly some place like Ohio, the yields were not as good. They were lower than what the government had guessed. And this is kind of contrary to what they're seeing with corn here in Ohio. The corn yields were very good, but the bean yields were basically not carried through in the same way. So that has hurt the overall total bean production. And the price is kind of reflecting that. And there was a period of time in there where you had pretty significant drop in bean prices. And then here in the last few days, that's kind of reversed itself after they got the lower yield from the report. That brought beans back 25 cents on one day. And then they've been inching up ever since. So we're basically not back to where we were at one point, but it's coming back fairly significantly. So it appears that the prices on both corn and beans have got some pretty decent legs under them. And see, this is the reflection that we're seeing in the fertilizer industry. Discussing it with different suppliers and with the farmers themselves, and it's all across the country. Discussed this with farmers in the South, and then in the upper north central region, in the East. These prices are just pretty unbelievable. And nitrogen has been the one that's really been stoking the fires here lately. Phosphorus, if you go back to February of this year, nitrogen and phosphorus started their march upward. and potassium kind of was the laggard. And then here in the last 6 weeks to 2 months, potassium has gone up quite substantially. So you're basically looking across the board at everything. Potassium year over year is up 100%. Phosphorus is up 80 to 85%. Nitrogen is up in the 80 to 85, in some places 90%. You start looking at gas or anhydrous, that's taken another huge step up. So this has really increased the price significantly in a year over year fashion. And see, this is something that as a company, growers has discussed this with farmers, for years, trying to suggest that if you can approach the soil in a different methodology, that your ability to back away from this fertilizer input can be quite significant, especially when you start getting into years when prices start to increase quite substantially as they have this year. And the industry is looking at it as something that farmers have to do. I mean, the CEO of Mosaic said, that these commodity prices are basically holding steady. For farmers to capitalize on that, they need to add the fertilizer in order to get the yields. Ken Ferry has come out and said, if you're going to rent new ground, you got to be very careful. You need to look at the soil tests. And it's kind of interesting. He's talking at the absolute values of P and K particularly, but he's also discussing pH as a calcium factor. He doesn't discuss it in that matter, but they realize that if the biological isn't alive, those other values are totally meaningless. So again, this fertilizer situation has really changed the whole landscape per se. And I believe this is going to affect commodity prices also. The run up in corn, which is really kind of exceeded beans, is tied directly to the fuel business with gasoline, the oil price being at the levels that they are at. The usage of ethanol has been quite significant. They're saying at this point that the storage capacity or the storage volumes of ethanol are at some of the lowest levels they've seen in probably a 10 or 11 year period. So again, this is adding to the price of corn, which again is putting pressure, on our dairymen. It's putting pressure on our cow-calf operations or on the beef cattle industry. And see, again, when you start looking at pigs and chickens, your rate of gain in relation to pound feed is a lot tighter than it is in the ruminant business. So they are affected by it too. They have other things that they can substitute in there. But again, the pressure that's on the ruminant business is quite substantial. And so the fertilizer industry is using, the commodity prices to their advantage. There's discussion about shipping problems, adding to the fertilizer prices, and some of the raw ingredients that we use. It doesn't wash when you start looking at the shipping side of it. Now, discussing it today with Daniel Weaver, all fertilizer basically is offshore, and P and K. The P and the K, the potassium has always been offshore. The mines that's been servicing North America is in Canada. They've tried to develop some in Michigan, and the ones that were in the Southwest, Arizona, those have been shut down for a while or have gone to minimal amount of usage, and the bulk of it is actually coming out of Canada. So that's foreign shipped. The phosphorus industry has basically went offshore. The bulk of the phosphorus industry was in Florida, and as that's become a snowbird haven for the retirees and the problems they had with leakage in the water systems, they've pretty well shut that phosphorus industry down. And so nitrogen, that too has become a foreign source, particularly because of natural gas. It's always basically been the seed of the source has been the Middle East because the gas and the oil wells are there. And then back in 08 and 09, when we had this kind of run up on nitrogen, company were going to try to build plants in North America to manufacture nitrogen. And the Obama administration basically used regulation to keep them off of the map. Well, then as gas or natural gas became a cheaper item and fuel prices went down, then they could not justify building those plants. So all three fertilizer elements are basically offshore production. And see, the shipping industry is, really complicated the factor. The guys have seen from 08 and 09 this run up in prices because of the run up in commodities, but you add the transportation problems that we have at the same time, and really we've got something, unusual going on. And the companies are going to try to take advantage of that. As I mentioned before, we have some ingredients that we know are manufactured in the States, and they're basically telling us that, this is something that we're going to have a hard time getting it shipped. And that's not the fact of the matter. I mean, the shipping is not a problem. So basically, these are created shortages to take advantage of, the situation that they have going on at this point. So the big question now is how long can they sustain this? If we go back in history with 08 and 09, they held this as long as they could, but the farmers resisted quite significantly. So as we got into closer to planting time, South was going to the field in early March. The companies started to relent and back these prices down to a certain degree because there just wasn't any movement. So again, that'll be the big question mark is, how long they can make this resistance last. And so the overall landscape as far as agriculture is concerned, you look at chemicals, it's the same vein, particularly with the Roundup. One of the major manufacturing plants in the country in Louisiana was damaged by the hurricane last summer. And whether they were able to bring it back online or not, that's still up for debate. But they're using it as a weapon with the volume, and that's pushed the price significantly higher. So we're seeing people that are pretty well locked in with something like Roundup as far as their weed control is concerned. That's going to be problematic from a cost factor because many areas they just can't get the Roundup, but the cost has gone up quite significantly. And see, Liberty is going to be in that same vein, gentlemen, because that is a phosphorus product also. The shortages on Liberty, talking with guys, they can get it, but the price increase has been quite significant. So again, this is going to add to the problem. And for those of you that missed it, John Deere basically, when they went on strike, the union hierarchy basically suggested that the rank and file accept the terms that management offered, and everybody thought the strike was over with, and then the union vote was 55-45 against. So they're back out on strike again, and supposedly they were going back to the bargaining table today, which I found hard to believe on Veterans Day. So it's probably going to be next week before any of that bargaining starts again. And, even in our case, we've had some gremlins working on our combine, and we've had trouble with parts. We've had some issues that have been resolved rather quickly, but we've had other issues that we've been sitting still because finding the parts has been a significant problem. So again, those cost factors are going to add into this this whole scenario that we have going on in agriculture at this point. So again, I think our focus at growers is to try to suggest to farmers how to approach this problem with these higher prices. We've tried to hold the line as best we can, but again, the idea of reducing these volumes and trying to target that fertility and get it where it belongs, that's something now that's really starting to come home to farmers. The major services, AgWeb, DTN, there's been a lot of chatter on there about the efficacy of strip tilling, putting these strips in, putting the dry in the strip to make it more available to the crop. Again, it's just targeting the fertility per se. And they're promoting this as a very environmental thing as far as soil health is concerned. This is something we've not seen. Strip till's been around for a fair number of years, and the health has really come to the forefront until now. I think this is establishment trying to put something to try to control this fertilization. Really, Lake Erie, the Michael system, that supposedly was not very high, and the prediction was it was going to be a below normal year. Well, the final numbers came in on that, and it's been a fairly high year for microcystine production in Lake Erie. And that's basically been buried in the press because their success rate is just not working. And see, there was enough moisture this spring that they're losing nutrients into the lake. Their overall approach has just not been that successful. And see, we believe it goes back to the type of materials that they're using, and this ability to get it into the crop with minimal amounts is they understand how we need to go through the biological activity of the soil. And see, that's as we study that more at growers, with the research, we're seeing that this stimulation of the biological, in the soil root zone is very critical to the health of the plant. And see, once you can get that to occur, you can start backing these materials down. That probably one of the best comparisons that I've talked with researchers about is, the idea that you can fertilize heavily, but it's like IVing the crop, which is basically what you're doing in the hospital at surgery time. And see, it can be done, but the cost of it is quite substantial. If we can go out here and work through the design of the system, and get the immune system functioning and work with that biological combination, it's much more effective and much more realistic on the individual, which in this case would be the crop. Its ability to withstand stress is going to be significantly better. So this is something that we're going to talk a lot more about and trying to show you the uniqueness of the product and how it works both with the biological life and the crop itself. It's critical to cut these usages back. And with this cost factor now, they're going to have to keep the corn price relatively high in order to get guys to raise corn. There's a lot of scuttlebutt in the industry talking with these guys. The neighboring farmers are talking about sunflowers, canola, and going all soybeans. And see, that's going to be a real problem for many of these suppliers or the peoples that are looking for feed, because if they all go beans, there's not going to be any energy out there. So they've got to keep that in the ballpark. And so I think we're going to see that these commodities are going to hold, and that's going to keep the price of fertilizer at a higher level at this point. So that's some of the things that guys are talking about out there, and we'll just keep discussing it and dissecting it, and we'll give you some options that you can work with. I think that covers it, Zach.
That's great. Thank you, Jim. We'll move into the discussion now about the dried growers. So I'll share my screen. All right. Somebody with a computer, let me know if you're able to see that, please. It should be a slideshow picture of 2 plastic containers of dried growers with a liquid one in the middle. Okay.
I got it, Zach.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. So I'll start by giving a bit of background on what this experiment was. So the original one, these pictures are not from the original one. The original one, Matt dried over, it was over a stove, a gallon of growers. And Matt, if you're on, was it a gallon of 1034O or was it another like 1185 or something?
The original one, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
Yeah. Very good. Yep, the original one was actually done with an infrared heater. It was just your common chicken heater bulb. We found if we place it over a concrete block, so to speak, kind of like a paving block, we were able to precipitate these different fertilizers. And so from there, we just worked on precipitating one completely, a whole gallon. And what we found ultimately is as you'll see as we go on here, what you're seeing on the screen right now, which is actually almost filling 2 containers of dried material from 1 gallon of growers. This one that you're looking at was actually dried in a kind of a solar created thing. It was a cold frame that we purposely exposed to the sun during a dry period in July. And so that actually, we were able to get more water out of it, but we got more volume of material also, which is kind of an interesting thing. There's a lot of different aspects going on there that we're still figuring out why the uniqueness of this material.
Yep. And so the reason, like we were surprised, well, Jim wasn't, but Matt and I were, when the growers grew as it dried. Conventional wisdom would say that as something loses volume, in this case, the water content, it should shrink in size. And normally that's true. But with growers, and as you'll see in the next picture, the structure of the minerals in growers, because of how it's made, a hot mix solution, it leaves a very strong crystalline structure. And so when you remove the water from that, this structure becomes very apparent. And this structure is indicative of all kinds of interesting things with growers that we're going to get into. But as the water was removed from solution, the minerals reformed this crystalline structure. And because there's so much pore space within this structure, just like a grain of salt, it grew. Now, you can see pictures. So Jim, kind of like you, because you know more about this stuff than I do, the crystalline structure. So as you guys can see here, the picture on the left is growers, a close-up shot of the crystals. In the middle is dried 1034O, and on the right is another liquid product, 1185. Jim, do you think you could talk a little bit, walk us through kind of explaining these crystalline structures, how they're formed and their significance?
Yeah, no, that the crystalline structure that when you study inorganic chemistry, the solubility of products, the ability of water molecules to penetrate the structure so that you get a uniform solubility. The more uniform the crystals are, the easier that occurs. And this picture it shows that very, very significantly, how uniform the crystals are within the growers, whereas the other products are very haphazard. And Matt did another experiment. If you go back to the pan crystal of growers, you look how uniform that is. And Matt had done that with other fertilizer materials, and the uniformity is not even close to the grower's product. And see, this is very important, guys, when you're looking for a uniformity of solution, because as those crystals are formed so that the water gets in there and can touch all portions of the dry structure, it will stay in solution much better. So you'll get that uniform solution. A lot of you guys have bought products. They bring it in, they either put it in a tank for you or in a transport tank, and then, it sits there for maybe even a half hour and it starts to stratify for you. And they're always telling you, well, you got to agitate that. Well, as soon as they start telling you you've got to agitate, you really don't have solubility. All you have is really a suspension. And see, the problem with that is when that suspension stops being suspended, its ability to resuspend itself is not near as good. So your stratification becomes worse each time it stratifies. And see, if you're just looking at strictly an NPK product, that's not as critical. But when you start introducing micronutrients in there, when you're working with very little, it's absolutely critical to you. Because if you're going to spread a micronutrient over an acre at 3 or 4 pounds, and you cannot keep that solution uniform, you have no idea how uniform that 3 or 4 pounds is spread over that acre. And see, that's basically what you're looking at with micronutrients. So that's a very key factor in building this crystalline structure. And the only way you do that is with heat or reaction. Zach refers to it as the hot mix, which again, that's a very important thing for growers, is creating that heat to build that crystalline structure. Zach, if you go back to the 3 crystals that we were looking at under the microscope, that kind of tells guys that the importance of right, correct. Now you look at the one on the left. In order to get that kind of crystalline structure, it takes a certain amount of energy for that to happen. And see, that's what you get with the hot mix. In other words, some of you guys are thinking, well, how do they get a hot mix? We put it on a hot plate and turn the heat up. Well, that's not the way it's done. We're creating heat with the chemical reaction of the mixture of the solutions. And see, that's what makes it rather dangerous, because you've got to get that heat up into that boiling area. You don't want it to boil, because the problem, if you boil the solution, you start to, evaporate it, or you drive off some of the gases. And see, in the solution, you've already got nitrogen, and you vaporize nitrogen into its gaseous form. It's very dangerous. I mean, you can ignite that. That's, TNT. That's nitrogen is the explosive part of that. And see, that's why everybody is very reluctant to do hot mix. Now, some of these companies, have caught on to this as a sales gimmick and said, yeah, we're hot. It warms up. Well, yeah, it warms up to the touch. So you may be in what we would call lukewarm shower water, but you're not into a zone where you're actually getting chemical reactivity. And see, that's to get to that volume of heat it's tricky. And the people that do it have to know what they're doing in order to create that kind of energy. And see, those bonds and that structure itself is just the resultant of that reactivity. And that's why we've found growers that was manufactured back in the 50s, and it's still basically the same product. Now, we talk about getting crystals. When you get into cold weather, you get evaporation of water when you get that extreme cold. And see, we all know that, water, a solution of water can only hold so much dry material. until it just won't hold anymore. And see, that's the concentration you're getting with growers is very high with the mineral elements that are in it. So when you start to evaporate it, you're going to bring those crystal formations to occur. And see, we tell guys, if you add fresh growers to it, you can get some of that solubilized. If you use distilled water or RO water, you can get some of that solubilized. If you heat it up, that's going to help you with that solubility also. But again, when those crystals form, that uniform, it will go back in the solution uniformly. And so you're basically, actually, when you start to dehydrate it and crystallize it a little bit, the solution that's in there is not necessarily a 10, 20, 10. It might be a 12, 24, 12 or something like that. So again, but when you start to bring the water into it, the fact that the crystal is uniform and the water will get in there, it'll go back into solution for you. And then you'll maintain your same uniformity. And see, what's so special about that is that Victor Tegens was a true chemist. He understood how to do that type of thing. And that made it a very unique product. For years, we've said we're a true solution. And see, that's something that the industry has just totally ignored. They want to take Terry Norris always says, Jim, it's just melted down dry fertilizer. Well, that's exactly, solubilize these elements and think that you have the same type of solution as you do when you use heat or reaction, and it's not the case. It's totally different. So that picture is very, very helpful to understand, the uniqueness of the growers, and then the way the crystal's built for Matt, and then the idea that it expands. See, when the water molecules get in within the crystal and dissolves that, the structure comes, it disassociates. And see, then its volume is taken up in the water. Well, as soon as you pull that water away, those forces of bonding take over again, and you build the crystalline structure. And when you build it, you get the gaps in there, so that increases the volume for you. And Zach saying, I wasn't surprised by that. Well, I understood it, but when Matt did it, I was quite surprised at the volume part of it. And as Matt said, as he evaporated more, his volume increased more also, because again, you're taking the water part out of it, which builds the solid crystals. And actually, there's work done in some European countries where they're trying to measure the quality of food by at the crystalline structure of the molecules within the substance itself, trying to differentiate a healthier carrot from another carrot by looking at that crystalline structure. Because again, why the extra energy that carrot has harvested, from the sunlight, it's being stored somewhere, and it's being stored in the crystal itself. And so they're saying that this is really the true measure of quality of food is by looking at those crystals. And then, fluids are the same way. This can be taken, to all different forms of energy, basically. So.
Thank you, Jim.
They get everything. Zach, is there anything else I should discuss a little bit?
So far, you've done great. We're gonna move on. Like, there might be things that come up, Jim, that I want you to speak on again, or that you want to speak on, and please pipe up when that happens. But you talking about the crystalline structure forming as it dries, allowing it to then be resolubilized, leads really well into what I want Matt to talk about tonight. So our final slide is one that Matt put together of the process of him resolubilizing the GMS that he dried. So Matt, do you want to walk us through and explain what you did here and your findings, please?
Sure, and I'll explain it for both the those who don't have the ability to see this, but basically, if you were at the meeting back in 2019, you've seen we had a gallon jug that had the dried growers in it from a gallon of growers. That jug still existed. It doesn't anymore because it's been put back into a liquid, and that's the process that you're seeing. So basically, this material has been open to the air for 2 years. So this was it was going to be real fascinating to me. So we weighed it out. You'll see a sticker on there that says 8.2 pounds after water removed. That's jug and all. In that when I had originally done that, that's how we was weighing it. But the reality of it is we was going to fill that jug back full of water. I didn't put all the water in right away because I was curious, as Jim had stated. You have to have. I wanted to make this so it's also instructive for when someone goes through a winter and you evaporate the water out. If Jim has said, why you have to put X amount of water back in. So I wanted to I want to say this, I wanted to make this for tonight, but I also wanted to make it for some other aspects here in the future. So I didn't put quite all the water in. I was about 2 to 3 ounces shy. And so at 2 minutes, you can see that, right away. Now, bear in mind, nothing's been mixed until it says it's been mixed. So there are 2 minutes, there's 2 hours, again, static. I'm not touching that. At 5 hours, it was interesting to note that material was moving. I tried to do a movie to show it, but that was really difficult in a round glass like that. I realized that would, if I want to redo that, I got to do it in those flat containers. But it was pretty wild. At that 2 to 5 hours range there, especially, that material was just moving around on its own. It was kind of like it's just like a small beating heart. It was just really wild to look at. And unfortunately, it just couldn't capture it very well. At 20 hours, everything kind of settled in. So then you'll see what we did is we actually stirred it after 20 hours. And that picture there, you can see how it kind of looks like it's suspended and went into solution, but it really didn't. Totally. It would want to settle back out. So I thought, okay, before I put the rest of the water in, let's heat it from 62 degrees, because that was the temperature of the lab where I had it. So all the materials at that point was at 62 degrees. So we're mixing cold here, which is kind of another little amazing issue to me. So I warmed the solution to 72 degrees, and boy, adding that 10 degrees, just all of a sudden made a lot more of it go in the solution. And you can see in the picture I have here, you'll see like a light dissolved fluffy material in the bottom, almost like those old precipitation pictures we had of water. And so I'm looking at that and I go, okay, so that was fascinating. We got more to suspend. And then all I did is there's another picture. There's an eighth picture basically that shows after I added all the remaining water in, which that extra 2 to 3 ounces basically cleaned up and put in suspension what little was remaining at the bottom. And so it basically is now back to being a gallon of growers. Those pieces were fairly hard and they were crushed down in there to make it fit in a gallon jug 2 years ago. And so it was interesting. You have to have the right amount of water to suspend, that element. As Jim had said, water can only take so much. Keep adding sugar to water and eventually it's not going to hold it. And sure, temperature has an aspect also to it. So pretty fascinating. Learn a bunch of little things. Yes, if I was to use in doing smaller amounts of dried material, and I will redo this in such a way if I'm instructed to. The difference between getting the solubility at, obviously this glass jar is totally full now, and all that dry material went back in the growers. If you was to use a higher TDS water, it would take a little bit more water over maybe the top of that jug. And that's simply because you've already taken up places for that hydrogen-oxygen bond to hold elements and suspend it. You have already essentially, because you're putting in higher TDS water, you've already used that space. So therefore, it would take a little more. So it goes back to if you had one of the old 290 growers tanks and it's clear full, and you got a cold, dry air, then the temperature drop real quickly, you're going to pull some of the water out. And so you're going to get crusty material, on the top or whatever. Now, if you added higher TDS water, you're going to have to add more than the original volume in there. But if you had like rainwater and stuff, no, as soon as you get it, I mean, that's kind of what this experiment proved. I was trying to get it to do that, and I think we were successful because I am using basically really low TDS, almost rainwater TDS water, adding it, and so went back in the solution. So we'll develop this into kind of an instructional thing too, for the sales force to explain when people see, a crusher growers isn't coming out quite right after a winter, it is just evaporated water. So there you go, Jim.
Thanks, Matt. I'd like to add in
Yeah,
there.
no, that's very good.
I'd like to add in there.
Go ahead, Zach.
Thanks, Jim. That the process of solubilization, when something's being dissolved, it's endothermic. It absorbs heat. So as a point of application for you guys, if you're trying to get anything that's crystallized out in your tanks back into solution, the reason that a warmer environment, as Matt demonstrated here, raising it by 10 degrees, is that there's more heat energy available for that water to dissolve the solids. And that's the same reason why if you're stirring sugar or salt into water, it dissolves a lot faster into warm or hot water than it will into cold water.
Yep.
It's a little point of application there. I'd also like to add that Matt has done other experiments. I don't have the pictures on here, where in smaller quantities of product, he dried out growers 1034O, 1185, and a 7-something 11 with molasses, and then put them back into solution. And growers was the only one. It went quickly and easily back into solution, and it was the only one that stayed in that. The others, they may have eventually, it took longer, gone back into some form of suspension, but material settled out after that, which is what Jim was talking about before, where each time you resolubilize those things, you lose some of that structure, some of that dissolvability, I guess. And so when it settles out next, more is going to settle out unless we'll go back in.
Yeah.
Not true with growers when you have a true solution.
Yeah. No, that's a big factor right there, Zach. And I never really thought about this till Matt started, doing those experiments where they resolubilize it. You guys think about this when you're planting. So you got your material and you soil and turn dry, which can happen many times in the spring. Now, those solutions, when they go bone dry, that water disappears and you've got the solid material in there. Now, you get the first rain that comes along, and the next grower solution that comes out, we show one of those experiments that Matt did with 1034O and growers. He inverted it, got it solubilized, and then let it dry out, and then resolubilized it. And the growers, like you said, it goes right back into solution. Whereas at 1034O, it would not do that. See, so you put those products into the soil, it gets very dry, they lose water, and then the next rain that comes along, which one is going to go back into a form that the plant is going to be able to utilize? And when you start thinking about plants, we're all thinking about corn or beans or alfalfa or whatever. You got to start thinking about the biological activity in there too, because that is a plant form also. So their ability to extract or utilize that solubilized nutrient is going to be much better with the growers. That goes back in the solution just like it was before. So your concentration doesn't vary. And see, this inability to resolubilize itself starts to change the concentrations of those particular elements. And see, we believe that if there's any contamination in there, That's really what you're looking at, that lack of solubility. The pictures that will be in the late fall edition of the solution, you can see in the 1034-0 that it doesn't, the growers is perfectly clear because it's totally solubilized. 1034-0 is not even close. And see, some of that is a lack of crystalline structure to get it solubilized, but some of that is contamination that struggles to be solubilized. Also, you get into these heavy metals and their ability to be solubilized in water is very, very low. And see, that'll start to express itself in the amount that goes back in the solution for you. So if it just stays in there high, after, you go through a dry period after planting, and then it rains again, but it will not go back in the solution for you, you might as well spread dry fertilizer because you're in the same boat. The ability at it, microbial's ability to get at it. You're going to rely on microbes that to work on that dry product is just like decaying bone from a dead animal. It can be done, but it's a totally different population. And see, this is the function of trying to get that crop to grow with the biological and do it with minimums. You've got to keep the right population to make that occur. And see, if you start shifting these populations to deal with these incongruencies of the fertilizer that you put on, you're just going to slow the whole process down. So what does that mean? You just got to add more. And see, that to me is the ploy of the industry, is to keep using more. Number one, you feel you need it. Number two, you got to pay for it. See? So again, that little tidbit from that experiment was a real eye opener for me. I'd never ever thought about that. And that's a big function, man. A very important function.
One other point of application from the good crystalline structure of growers is how it's absorbed into foliage.
Yes.
Study out of the 50s, more recent ones have shown that phosphorus is the primary vehicle by which nutrients are absorbed through foliage. It's very easily absorbed and translocated down into the roots. It doesn't stay in the leaves. Some nutrients, such as calcium, can be absorbed to a lesser extent into the leaves, but they stay there. They don't move into the rest of the plant, which defeats the purpose. Growers is, of course, a 10-20-10, 20% phosphorus. It's the highest concentration mineral in it. And there's a reason for that. Dr. Tietjens knew ahead of his time in many ways that phosphorus was the vehicle. And so when you have a product that is so tightly chemically bound, again, from the hot mix, and this is proven by the crystalline structure, that phosphorus is going to be pulling in the micronutrients that are in that solution with it. Whereas otherwise, if they were not that chemically bound, the easily absorbed nutrients might get absorbed in, but the rest are going to lay on the leaf and they're not going to be of any use, and they can actually harm it. Another thing that Matt has done is showing, what would it be? Dried mineral, either from hard water or bad product left on the surface of leaves that actually creates a film over them once the water has evaporated or been absorbed from the spray. And so this is a very real issue. It's not just a matter of having film on your leaf, though. It's a matter of efficiency. Is the plant actually using what you're applying? It's a big question that every farmer should be asking himself, both from an economic and an environmental and just a practical standpoint. And so I don't have anything else on this topic to cover. Matt or Jim, is there anything else you'd like to cover?
Yeah, no. On a very big issue when he's talking about phosphine, the driving mechanism, twofold. Number one, it's the driving mechanism for absorption through the leaves, but it's also the driving mechanism for absorption through the roots. And the radioactive isotope research that Michigan State did substantiated both of those factors. But the thing that farmers have to think about is, every one of you guys have used a product that's phosphorus driven for your weed control with glyphosate or Liberty. That is the driving mechanism that pulls it in. Now, you don't have to think about hot mix to make glyphosate because you have organic radicals that are associated with the phosphorus in glyphosate. And see, with growers, when you study chemistry, you study two phases of chemistry, inorganic and organic. And organic are carbon-based compounds. And see, that's what glyphosate is. And see, if you look at solubility in water, likes dissolve likes. Organic compounds like oil or gasoline or diesel fuel doesn't mix very well with an inorganic product like water. And see, the plant tissue is organic in nature, so its ability to absorb the phosphorus with the organic molecule, the glyphosate, works very, very nicely without creating a specialized structure. Now, the purity, we know that's in there because the purities of the different phosphorus acids that they use to make these compounds affects the availability. You know, you have guys that buy the knockoff Roundups that, you know, you got to go 25, 30% higher in order to get kill because of the toxicity that's in the tech grade acid that these people are buying to formulate. That's why it's cheaper, just that simple. But when you're looking at an inorganic product like growers, you've got to get that crystalline structure formed in order to get the absorption through the leaf. And in actuality, it's got to be the same thing in the root zone or for the biological. You need that crystalline structure with low impurity levels in it in order for it to be absorbed correctly by the microbes. And see, once they get it actively going, you know, they're gonna purify it going into the plant. But some of that you're gonna get absorbed directly into the plant. See, that's the thing in the spring of the year. It depends on how much snow you want on the bill of your hat to how much help you're going to get from the biological. And see, if it's colder, you know, the plant's going to have to take more in directly. And see, that's why it's so critical for you to get it right to the seed. Now, how much you need on the seed, that's another whole discussion because it's going to go back to the environment itself and how cold it is, how soon the biological gets started. What are you no-till? Are you tilling? Is that going to warm the soil up quicker? If you got a rain or if you didn't get a rain, is it a cold rain or a warm rain? See, all of these factors are going to be very critical to the availability of the product itself. That's why you want to have as balanced a product as possible, as clean a product as possible, so that when the plant needs help or the biological working with the plant needs help, their ability to get a hold of it is significantly better.
Thanks, Jim. We'll move into if anybody has any questions. We've got about 5 minutes left. So if you're on a phone, it's *6 to unmute yourself. And if you're on a computer, it'll be a little microphone icon in the bottom left. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. Thanks a lot, Jim and Matt, for doing most of the speaking. Our next call, we're actually not going to have a conference call next month because it's our virtual annual meeting. And so because it's virtual, a lot more people are going to be able to have access to that. We'll have information coming out shortly about the meeting. I would encourage each of you to tune in, though. There's going to be a lot of helpful information for you. And we'll cover all kinds of topics. So it'll be quite beneficial and interesting.
You got the dates on that, Zachy?
I know that the salesman one is December 9th, but that's all that I know.
Yeah, the Thursday one, that'll be access for everybody. And again, we're going to try to talk about, you know, cost factors and, you know, the cost analysis sheet that we have. We think this thing has got a lot of power for guys to work with. And we're going to be looking at that in as much detail as we can without, you know, getting into math class. We'll try to make it as interesting as possible. But, you know, with $1,000 for a ton of anhydrous, I think guys are going to have to start looking at, different ways to approach this.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. And I hope you have a great night and a wonderful month.